Picture this, you're a king. You have power palaces, velvet robes, and gold-plated everything. You sleep in a giant four-poster bed draped with silk. And yet, you're never alone. Not really. Every night servants tend to you. Courtiers wait just outside your chamber. Guards pace outside your door. You might share your bed with your queen or with a mistress, but you'll rarely get a moment that's truly private, because in the medieval world, even kings had little control over their own bedrooms. So how did royal intimacy even happen? How did kings make love in a world where their bedrooms were political stages, and even sex could be a public duty? Well, let's take a closer look. To begin with, we have to understand one simple truth about royal life in the Middle Ages. There was no such thing as privacy, not in the way we think of it today. And the king's bedroom was far from a quiet, personal retreat. In fact, a medieval king's bedchamber was one of the busiest rooms in the entire palace. It was called the privy chamber, but that word didn't mean private like we use it now. Instead, it meant personal in a royal sense. This was where the king conducted his day-to-day life when he wasn't ruling from the throne. And he was never alone. There were valets, body servants, grooms of the stool, yes, literally someone whose job was to help him on the toilet. There were pages bringing in warm water, stewards organizing meals, guards stationed at the door, even doctors who might check in if the king so much as sneezed. This wasn't just a place for rest, it was the king's stage. He was constantly being watched, served, and talked to. Even going to bed was ceremonial. In many courts, especially in France and England, there was an official putting to bed routine. Nobles might be invited to watch the king get undressed. Not in a weird way, this was considered a privilege. It showed you were trusted, important, close to power. A select few would help the king undress, say a few words, and then bow their way out, leaving the inner circle, usually just one or two favorite attendants, to extinguish the candles and tuck him in. But here's the twist: if the queen was coming to bed that night, there might be even more ceremony. Sometimes ladies in waiting would escort her in. If it was a royal wedding night, clerics or witnesses might be nearby to confirm the consummation. In the worst cases, sheets would be checked afterward for blood to prove it happened. Romantic? Not exactly. See, for a medieval king, sex wasn't just about desire. It was political. Every time a king went to bed with his queen, the entire kingdom silently waited for one result: a healthy male heir. This made intimacy a matter of national security. If a king couldn't perform, or if the queen didn't get pregnant, whispers would start. Was the king impotent? Was the queen cursed? Was someone else fathering the children? This led to some truly bizarre customs. In some cases, witnesses were required for consummation, not in the room exactly, but close enough to hear something. The sounds of the royal bed were essentially being logged like official paperwork. And if things didn't go well, it could unravel alliances, void marriages, or if you're Henry VIII, spark a national religious crisis. Let's talk about one of the most awkward examples in history: Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. They married as teenagers, but they didn't consummate their marriage for 7 years. You heard that right, 7. And this wasn't some quiet, private issue. It was the subject of international gossip. Austrian diplomats sent letters back home asking, "Has it happened yet?" French courtiers made cruel jokes. Even Marie Antoinette's own mother, Empress Maria Theresa, wrote letters pressuring her daughter to try harder. Why was everyone so obsessed? Because if the marriage wasn't consummated, it could be annulled. And if there was no heir, the Bourbon line could collapse. Eventually, after years of pressure and embarrassment, the royal couple did finally make it happen. But by then, the damage to their public image was already done. Their bedroom problems had become everyone's business. And it wasn't just the king's. Queens had almost no control over their own bodies. Their job was to produce heirs, preferably male ones, and their fertility was under constant surveillance. A missed period sparked palace rumors. A miscarriage could be interpreted as a bad omen. And if a queen gave birth, the room could be filled with witnesses to ensure that no baby swapping occurred. One of the most tragic examples, Marie Antoinette again. When she gave birth to her first child in 1778, over 200 people crowded into the room: nobles, doctors, servants, even strangers, just to watch. She nearly fainted from the heat and pressure. Why all the fuss? Because royal lineage had to be seen as legitimate. Even childbirth had to be performative to assure everyone that the baby really came from the queen's body. So let's talk about ritual. Because in medieval royal life, even the bed was sacred and strange. In many courts, the marriage bed wasn't just a private space, it was a political symbol. The king and queen's bed was meant to be a fertile site, literally and symbolically. Sometimes it was even blessed by a priest before the wedding night. Yes, blessed like a church altar. Clergy would sprinkle holy water on the sheets. Prayers were said, asking God to grant the couple fruitfulness and holy offspring. That's a lot of pressure to put on one mattress. Believe it or not, there were rules about how kings and queens should have sex. The church had strong opinions. Certain days were off limits: Sundays, feast days, Lent, Advent, and about 150 other holy dates. There were restrictions during pregnancy, breastfeeding, menstruation, and up to 40 days after childbirth. Even positions were regulated. Anything other than missionary was frowned upon as unnatural, and sex was supposed to be strictly for reproduction, not pleasure. Now imagine being a king under pressure to produce an heir, constantly watched by your court, and still having to follow the church's strict calendar. It's no wonder many kings turned to mistresses. At least with them, the rules were a bit more flexible. But even royal affairs weren't private. In Versailles, King Louis XIV famously had a secret staircase behind the wall of his bedroom. He'd sneak through it late at night to visit his mistresses, especially Madame de Montespan and later Madame de Maintenon. These women weren't hidden away in shame. They had their own suites, their own staff, their own power. Some even influenced political decisions, but the court knew everything. Servants whispered. Nobles took notes. Gossip spread like wildfire. And it could be dangerous. Take King Edward IV of England. He secretly married a commoner, Elizabeth Woodville, likely after a passionate affair. But once the truth came out, it caused outrage among the nobility. A private moment exploded into a national crisis. In royal life, love could never just be about two people. Sometimes, the consequences of intimacy played out in brutal public fashion. Kings were often the targets of rumors that they were impotent, homosexual, overly lustful, or too attached to a single lover. Enemies used bedroom gossip as weapons. In medieval France, King Charles VI was declared mentally unfit, in part because of his erratic sexual behavior. In England, Edward II's close relationships with male favorites like Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser stirred accusations that he neglected his queen. And those accusations weren't private, they were aired in Parliament, repeated in chronicles, even sung about in taverns. Your sex life could cost you your crown. And queens weren't spared either. Anne Boleyn, wife of Henry VIII, was executed in 1536 after being accused falsely of adultery, incest, and plotting the king's death. Her supposed lovers were tortured and killed. Her private life was dissected like a criminal investigation. Whether guilty or not, the moment your intimacy became public, it could become deadly. All of this points to a deep irony in medieval royal life. Kings and queens had unimaginable power, wealth, and status. But when it came to their own bodies, sex, love, even childbirth, they were often the least free people in the realm. Everything was watched. Everything was judged. And everything could be used against them. Their bedchamber wasn't a refuge, it was a stage, and like any performance, one mistake could bring down the house. Here's something strange to consider. In many ways, the poor had more privacy than kings. A peasant might share a one-room home with their whole family, but they could still sneak behind a curtain, wait until the children were asleep, or simply take a walk into the woods. Kings? They had no such luxury. They lived inside palaces with hundreds, sometimes thousands of eyes constantly watching them. Servants, courtiers, clergy, ambassadors, spies. Even their most personal acts became matters of state. When a king lay with his queen, the entire kingdom had an opinion. When a queen gave birth, the crowd gathered. When a mistress came through a hidden passage, rumors erupted like wildfire. It's easy to assume that royalty meant freedom, but in the bedroom, it meant the opposite. The royal bed wasn't just symbolic, it was a weapon. Enemies used rumors of impotence or infidelity to undermine kings and queens. Political rivals spread gossip about affairs to destabilize marriages and alliances. Clergy wielded the power to declare unions invalid. Sex could end a dynasty. Just ask Henry VIII. His obsession with producing a male heir led him to 6 wives, 2 executions, the break from the Catholic Church, and the creation of the Church of England. All of it religion, rebellion, divorce, death because of one man's bedchamber anxieties. Or take the French Queen Marguerite de Valois, who was accused of multiple affairs and denied the right to see her husband. Not because of guilt, but because of politics. Her body was treated like a battlefield in a war of influence and reputation. The private became public. The intimate became strategic. So why did the royals go along with it? Why allow such invasive customs? Because ritual created control. Blessing the bed, parroting the bloody sheets, filling the room for childbirth, it was all meant to prove legitimacy, to assure the court that the king was virile, that the queen was faithful, that the heir was real. In an age without science or DNA testing, ritual and spectacle became truth. If the sheets were clean, the marriage might be annulled. If the queen screamed loud enough during childbirth, everyone believed it was her child. If the king was seen visiting the queen's chamber regularly, nobody questioned the succession. It wasn't about intimacy. It was about image. And yet, love did happen. Despite the pressure, the surveillance, the public performance, some royal couples did share real affection, even intimacy. Queen Isabella and King Edward II, despite political turmoil, showed signs of genuine closeness early in their marriage. King Charles II adored his mistress Nell Gwyn and visited her frequently. Even Henry VIII, before the obsession with heirs, was said to be deeply in love with Anne Boleyn. In those rare private moments before the door creaked, before the servant cleared his throat, there might have been laughter, whispers, the touch of a hand that wasn't strategic but sincere. It didn't last long, but it mattered, because even monarchs longed to be human. And that's what this whole story really comes down to, the cost of power. To rule meant to surrender your body to the court. Your love life, your fertility, your sexuality, all of it turned into spectacle and strategy. Every kiss had political consequences. Every child was a national issue. Kings were trapped in a gilded cage, expected to perform in the bedroom like they did on the battlefield. Queens were judged not for their minds or courage, but for the shape of their womb. And for all the robes, crowns, and palaces, they were often the loneliest people alive. So, next time you imagine a medieval king reclining in silk sheets with goblets of wine and flutes playing in the background, remember the truth. There were footsteps outside the chamber, candles burning, nobles whispering, a priest watching, a nation waiting. Power gave them riches, but it stole their privacy. Behind the crown was a person full of insecurities, obligations, and the quiet hope that somewhere in all that ceremony, they might just find a moment of real connection.